Economy, navigating for supply chain success. It is 10:01 on my watch. We're going to give everybody 2 more minutes. We know we're missing a couple of people, so 2 more minutes for folks to log in. Thanks. Okay, let's get going. Hello, everybody. My name is Tanis Osterman. For those of you that are just logging in, this is a session supplied to you by Supply Chain Canada, the Manitoba Institute, the Circular Economy, Navigating for Supply Chain Success. Our objectives for today, we want to introduce the circular economy. This isn't going to be a brand new topic for most of you. I am making that assumption. So we will cover it in a very small portion of the presentation. If you find after that you're still not totally sure about what it is we're talking about, I have some references at the end of the presentation that you can refer to get yourself more familiar with it. We're going to understand circular economic business models and how they might apply to what we do in our own day-to-day worlds. We'll introduce the role and importance of reverse logistics. We'll then identify some actions that supply chain professionals can take, and we're going to understand the current state of play. The format today is talking head, that would be me, attendee responses. We'll do that through an app called Slido, which I'll introduce to you in a minute, and then through Q&A. I would encourage you through your chat function to ask any questions that you have as we go, because that way we can make sure we catch stuff while it's popping into your mind. I always find that that's just a little bit easier than doing it all at the end. We're scheduled for 2 hours today. We will take a short break somewhere close to the midpoint of that, wherever there's a natural division in the presentation. To my right, I have Marin. You can't see him, but there's Marin. Marin is going to be running the Slido application. And again, I will give you instructions on that in a moment. But first, I'll give you a little bit more information about your talking head. That is me. My name is Tanis Osterman. I live here and work here. We're presenting right here in Manitoba, Treaty 1 territory, home of the Métis homeland. And I have been a sustainability environmental professional for close to 25 years. And I have dealt with sectors all across Canada. Like, there's not a sector that we haven't touched in some capacity. I'm the principal and owner of a consultancy called CanSustain, and I am very, very excited to finally start talking about circular economy to people where this isn't their full-time job. This is not a new concept, but it's one that's been sort of in the academic and theoretical clouds for a while, just like all our big cultural change stuff. It's taken a while to have it trickle down to a more fundamental or practical level. I'm excited about it mostly because, to me, this represents one of the biggest, most systemic things that we can do to handle and manage and mitigate most of our environmental issues that we see in front of us today. And we can do that while still maintaining the practices that we have become used to. And we can still enjoy the luxuries that we have become used to if we happen to live in a place that affords us those luxuries. So I mentioned Slido. Some of you may be familiar with it. For those of you that aren't, this is an application where we can ask for audience participation through questions that you answer, and then we all get to see the responses. But the first thing you need to do is to download the Slido app and follow these instructions. Your code is Circular Economy 25. I will give you 2 minutes to do that. And if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Maren will be monitoring that and hopefully can give you a hand. I will just mute and blind myself. Okay, we'll give everybody 1 more minute or so to nail down that Slido app. I understand from our registration list today that we have attendees from Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And with due respect to my peers and attendees in Ontario, being a Manitoba rural girl, I am very, very happy to see our rural populations participating in this discussion. Our provinces, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, we have different opportunities, we have different challenges than the provinces that host some of the more major centers like Montreal and Toronto and Vancouver. So I'm very happy to have you on board. I think that's great. So hopefully everyone's got their Slido instructions out and ready to go. If you have any questions on that, you can get a hold of Maren through the chat function, and if he can, he'll give you a hand. So we will get going. Oh, pardon me for a minute. So the perspectives that I want you to take as you listen to this presentation today are twofold. The first half, in general, I want you to think as a company representative. We're going to be addressing things and talking about things that may be outside of your functional area, might be outside of your organizational level, and that's okay. Think about your sector, think about the province that you live in, think about the customers that you serve. Then in the latter half of the presentation, I'm going to ask you to shift your perspective to that of a supply chain professional. We'll start to dig down on that function. And I recognize that some of you may not be directly involved in that function. I believe that that'll be okay as you go through this. I think we've laid this out in such a way that we're not going to lose anybody along the presentation. The first thing that we're going to do, though, is a little bit of a demographic survey or a scan. This is part of understanding the state of play. So this is where you will have your Slido screen, and we're asking you what the role is in your organization. We'll give everybody a minute to do that. I believe you see 3 questions. So the second, you can answer them all if you'd like, but on my screen for the group, we'll only be able to go through them one at a time. So the second and third questions, how long have you been with your organization and how long have you been working in a supply chain function? Maren, did the questions switch automatically or your?
No, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's gonna go to 1 minute.
Okay. So recognizing that one of the things that we have to do anytime we're trying to adopt new practices or learn new things, bring things into our business, support organizational change, is we have to start figuring out who we can lean on, who's our network. So while we haven't given you the opportunity to network through this call, I'd like you to pay attention to what the responses are in this survey, because that means like you need to know who's out there that has the same experience that as you and can relate to you. And you also need to know who's out there who obviously thinks the same in so much as we're talking circular economy because they're on this call, but who might be in a different functional or organizational group than you and could support you in a different way. So roll with the organization. I think we've given that enough time. We'll go back to how long have you been with the organization? I love watching this because you can always see that there's somebody, just Johnny on the spot, gets their answer in right away. Okay. Can you see the bottom there? So I can't give you both the top and bottom. So 2 to 5 years is our top, and then 16 to 20 years is the bottom. Very interesting. Okay, we'll go to the last question on this slide. How long have you been working in a supply chain function, directly or indirectly? So directly would be, as an example, you're right in the thick of it, right in logistics or procurement, and indirectly means you might have a supervisory role over that function. Wonderful. Okay, we're going to get back to the content here. So as I said at the beginning, one of the things we need to do is make sure we are all on the same page and cover the basics of circular economy. One of the reasons that we want to do that is because there is no standardized definition for circular economy that's used across the globe. There's a lot of principles that everybody sort of agrees on, but the area of study and application is just in its, organizationally, it's sort of in its infancy. And so coming up with a definition that means the same thing and we can compare apples to apples across the globe, not 100% there yet, but this is where we'll start. The circular economy is a model that maximizes the value of all materials and energy in the value chain by continually reusing materials, using resources as effectively as possible, and eliminating waste. Some of the other things that you might hear in association with this, and that I want you to think about as you think about your own shop and your own job function, as you communicate with your peers, is this is a departure from the linear economy. We're moving from a value added to a value maintained mentality and value set. We definitely want to get to the point where growth is decoupled from resource extraction. Our current economic model and what we have been promoting, particularly which accelerated post-war, was that the richest among us were those that had access to basically underground materials or the forces of nature and could claim those for their own. That's how wealth was generated. We want to decouple that. We want to say, no, you can still be successful. We can still grow. It does not matter if we consume more raw materials. We want to close the loop in materials and energy usage, keep things in play for longer. It does apply equally to civic society, government, and business. And all those three spheres have to work together successfully for us to realize the full value of this. This presentation today is geared towards the business community. I will give this same lecture or this presentation to government groups. We want to get to the same endpoint, but how it's presented to them and what they are able to contribute looks a little bit different. And it is a model that focuses on focusing on the value of the materials in the market, not materials in production. So we want to say what's already out there and how can I, either reclaim the value from that or add additional value to that. The major principles, and this is what you will find is sort of universally recognized with respect to a circular economy. While we may not have a standard single line definition, we have universally understood and accepted principles. Those are, we want to design out waste and pollution from our processes. We want to maintain materials and products in use for as long as possible. And we want to restore our natural systems. For the purposes of our discussion today, we're primarily going to be focusing on number 2, touching on number 1. Number 3 is absolutely critical, but that is one of the ones where it's civic society and government that will have a bigger play. So I said, when we give this lecture to government, we would then focus on number 3, possibly on number 1 and regulations, and number 2 would be something that we might not touch too much with them. These principles that you see here have been articulated and are provided by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. That is an excellent resource for everything from what is the circular economy to some of the very basic how-tos. Excellent, excellent resource. I encourage you to take a look at that. So graphically, what is linear economy? Seems very simple. We identify the consumer's need, we design something for them, buy stuff to process and build that thing. We send it out to the consumer, they use it, and then they dispose of it. This is what we, this is what we want to see. So in about 2 minutes, I just created some loops there. They're all legitimate, but depending on the sector that you're in or what you are producing, and even if you're a service-based sector, or a service-based company versus a product-based company, your loops will look different. What I want you to take from this is that we want to introduce loops into our business. That's the whole point of this. We are introducing loops and then closing those loops. The smaller the loop you can create, as in the fewer steps in it, the more value you will retain in your product and the cheaper it will be to close that loop. It's important to understand the linkages between circular economy and the things that we see going on around us that are causing us the greatest taxation stresses, sometimes psychological stresses, business stresses, and more importantly, in my world, environmental stresses. We need to be able to explain those linkages. So I'll take just a few minutes to do that. So one of the major linkages, and for many businesses, this is why they're engaging in circular economy discussions and moving in that direction, is because they feel it's a good way to mitigate the effects of climate change. So the way that they are able to do that is that they are, by focusing on keeping things in play for longer and longer, maintaining the value of what they are producing and their consumers are using, they do not need to extract virgin material, process virgin material. If they're not doing as much of that, they are not emitting as many greenhouse gases. There's also not as much waste from a company's product going into landfill or going into disposal or the oceans. Therefore, we are also limiting the contribution to climate change. The second point is protecting against resource scarcity and availability. While there has been historically a lot of companies moving in this direction because of the climate change link, COVID-19 really accelerated the rationale on the second point. Companies like at every single level of the supply chain all over the world, for anything you can imagine, they started to realize what this would look like. When you can't get access to the resources you need, even in this case, as a result of COVID-19, those resources happen to be people, but it highlighted what that risk is. If you can adjust your business model so that you can use materials already in play, then you are hedging against that scarcity. The third point, social benefit. The linkage there is that engaging in circular economic practices, whether at a corporate level or government level or at a civic level, you introduce the opportunity for more people in society to actively participate and therefore benefit. People can sort of reclaim their autonomy, reclaim their financial independence. We're also lessening the stress on government support systems if people can start to participate more fully in the capital systems. The last point, financial benefits, that goes without saying at a company level. If you are able to use resources that are already in play and not extract them, you will see savings from that. And there is a whole body of knowledge on what those financial benefits could be, how they would apply differently in different sectors, different points along the value chain. That particular point is particularly outside the scope of our discussion today, even though you need the data to be able to justify that, to take it up the chain to your executive. So it's super important, and you need to understand the linkages there. That's why we're doing this kind of thing, but we're not going to be covering a lot of that today. So we've talked about generally what a circular economy is, and then we need to talk about what the major models are within the circular economy. So 5 primary models have been identified: circular supply chain, resource recovery, product extension, sharing platforms, and product as a service. So the next few slides, I will go through each of those business models. I'll give you a brief explanation of what it is, and then I'll provide you with some examples. If we were fortunate enough to have this lecture, have this conversation in person, we could have a little bit more of an exchange to understand who might be playing in which business model, or, you know, bigger conversations about what those examples might be. In absence of that, I encourage you to take some notes about how you think your company and your function can fit into each of these models. And there will be another Slido question on that towards the end of this section. So the first one, circular supply chain. So this is where we are using recycled, renewable, or recyclable production inputs. We're limiting and eliminating new resource inputs. As the title might suggest, this is going to be one of the two business models where supply chain and logistics functions can have the biggest play. This is classic closing the loop. This is like, when I look at going from the linear model to the circular model, in my mind, a lot of what I see is the circular supply chain. The key elements to this are substitution and alternatives. So one example, Vodafone, a big telecommunications and hardware supplier I think they're based out of Europe, but they service a lot of Africa as well. They reclaim and recycle a lot of their cell phones. I'll just read from my notes here to make sure that I've got the right numbers for you. In 2020, Vodafone generated 9,500 tons of waste, in which they recovered and recycled almost 85%. 99% of their global network of waste was sent for reuse and recycling. So that they are taking either their own final product, plugging it back into their own production loop, or they're able to take product from a competitor, but is still very close to what they need, and just plug it back into production. I have included local examples, and to me, these are Manitoba examples, because that is on this front what I would be most familiar with. We spent some time with these folks here. A company here called Botanical Paperworks, very cool. They take seed, so flowers, vegetables, herbs, and they embed it, they impregnate paper with these seeds, and then turn that paper into things like wedding invitations, business cards, promotional items. It's beautiful, beautiful paper. Somebody receives this, receives their wedding invitation, gets a business card of somebody they don't really want to get to know anymore, and they can plant this piece of paper. Even if they don't plant the piece of paper, even if it just goes in the garbage, you've now got something that truly, truly will biodegrade, not like the fake biodegrade, like plastic that takes 200 years and they still call it biodegrading. No, really biodegrade and turn into something else. And so this is one example where the principle of recovery of natural systems comes into play. I said we wouldn't be touching on that a lot. I stand by that, but this is one example where that can happen. I just noticed that we've got some folks on chat. Maren, are you able to check that? I'll just keep going here, and then Maren can tell me if there's something that we should be discussing a little bit more. Resource recovery, another business model. This is where we are capturing the embedded energy or materials in unwanted or unused things. So the processes where we extract that energy or material is through recycling, upcycling, or downcycling. So while there will be overlap between all 5 of the business models you'll see, this is different than the first one in so much as we might be buying a recycled material input instead of taking the entire product and incorporating it into our industrial process. So the key elements of this are post-production is what we're focusing on, and end of use recovery. So, don't have examples here. Patagonia is one example. It's an international, I think it's based in the States, but it's an internationally recognized brand. And it's one of the first, certainly one of the first apparel brands where their claim to fame and the way that they marketed themselves was through promoting environmental acknowledgement, enjoyment, and protection. And they did a lot of exploratory work on what additional or different materials they could use to create their apparel. To date, they use, like the one product that I'm familiar with is they're using recycled post-consumer plastic, and they'll create like jackets and fleeces. So of all of the steps that they've taken to recover energy, or for them, it would be mostly material from unwanted things through upcycling, downcycling, and recycling, is they have reduced their carbon, waste, and water footprint combined by 82%. The one thing that strikes me though with Patagonia, their apparel is at a very high price point. I've looked at it in stores. I think it's great. Historically, it would be very difficult to buy a product made of post-consumer recycled material because it was harder to access. The technology was newer, so you could justify. You had to have a higher price point. But we are now getting to the point where technologies are becoming a little bit more ubiquitous. We're getting to the point where the cultural acceptance of purchasing and wearing those items are much more acceptable. So I do wonder how much longer Patagonia can keep their price point where it is, because competitors will start coming into the market with goods that are as high a quality as the ones that they have been producing. Another example here in Manitoba, or it's not a Manitoba company, but they operate in Manitoba, foodrescue.ca. So this company will make arrangements with things like hotels and restaurants to take their food that has not been consumed or that is still waste, and then they will send that out or deliver that to areas where there's food insecurity. So areas of poverty within their cities. I have not looked into it. I assume this type of organization has suffered greatly as a result of the pandemic, because restaurants don't have food waste because they don't have consumers. Product use extension. So this is super cool, and this is one where the government plays a big key. This is where we have the potential use of a product and it's deliberately extended. We do that through resale, repair, upgrades, design. The key element here is we're looking for opportunities throughout the entire life cycle to extend the use of the product that we're talking about. The reason that I say governments have a significant play here is because we've sort of all demonstrated to ourselves that there aren't going to be, most companies will not voluntarily extend the use of their product if it is more economical for them to not extend the use and life cycle or value of their life of the product. So governments are starting to regulate this to the point where just 2 weeks ago, I think 2 weeks ago, the government of UK said, that's it. If you want to play in the United Kingdom as a product manufacturer, you must allow consumers to repair your product. So whether that is through providing instructions, making sure parts are available at a decent price, whatever it takes, you are going to allow consumers that opportunity. The estimates was that they were going to, on average, be able to extend the products in play for between 5 and 10 years. Like, that is tremendous. Like, think of the waste that will not be created in that extra 5 to 10 years. Here in Canada, the Ontario government has been looking at this very seriously. I don't know the stage of where it is for approval, but to the point where there has been things drafted. Same thing for the Canadian government. The Canadian government is very seriously considering extended producer responsibility, which includes product life extension. Examples, IKEA. Okay, I got 2 examples for IKEA, one of which I came to this presentation, or when I prepared this presentation, I was aware of. One I just learned of like yesterday. So the first one is for a select number of IKEA products, they are actually including instructions now on how to disassemble the product so that that product can be shipped back to IKEA for reassembly and repair and reselling. Like, I think that's amazing. Although what's more amazing is that for as much as people hate putting up together IKEA furniture, they've managed to convince a significant amount of the population to actually disassemble IKEA furniture as well. That is fantastic. The second example from IKEA doesn't totally fit into product use extension. It could be spread among a couple of these other business models, is they actually offer a scraps recipe book where they're instructing people on how to use the scrap food, like, so as an example, a banana peel, and you can cook with that. So I saw this recipe for chocolate banana peel cake. Like, I just think that's fantastic. Standard Aero, another company here in Manitoba, and quite an old company, over 100 years. Their specialty is remanufacturing aerospace, marine, and industrial turbine engines. I worked there for a little while, about 23 years ago. And I can assure you that when this business model was started, this remanufacturing business model, it was not done because somebody decided it would have good things for the environment, or it would support them and for hedging against resource scarcity. The company's old enough, that wasn't a consideration. They did this because this was the most cost-effective business model, the most advantageous business model for them to put in play. That's why one of the oldest processes that you will see is remanufacturing. Like, most major original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, have some capacity for remanufacturing. They understand already, if you give us our product back, we have the opportunity to protect our IP. We have the opportunity to analyze this product to see how our consumers actually use it. And then we can refurbish it to the standards that we want internally, which is generally as high or higher than brand new, and put it out the door at a fantastic price point. So remanufacturing is a very, very significant part of the circular economy. Sharing platforms. This is where we are optimizing the use of assets by sharing access. So the key element here is coordination of multiple asset owners for the most part, and to scale likely requires digitization of a platform. So sharing platforms, I think if we rolled the clock back by 40 years, would probably be one of the most difficult things to do. Now, it's probably one of the easiest things to do when it comes to asset optimization. One example is Kickstarter. It doesn't always come, like these types of examples don't always come front of mind. One, because this is a service-based company. So you might wonder what their environmental impact is that would plug them into the circular economy. Again, I can tell you with almost absolute assurance that Kickstarter, their model is not present because it has environmental benefit. It's present because that was the best, most advantageous business model for them to put in play and still meet their business objectives. So if you're not familiar with Kickstarter, it's a crowdsourcing fundraiser for entrepreneurs and new businesses, primarily entrepreneurs and new businesses. It does make it much more cost effective for everyone involved to do this crowdsourcing shared platform than to have individual efforts going towards fundraising. Here in Manitoba, we've got something called Peg City, Peg being short for Winnipeg, Peg City Car Co-op. So whereas sharing platforms are very often sharing access to assets owned by different individuals. In this case, we're sharing access to assets that are purchased, owned, and operated by one entity. So Peg City Car Co-op, they go and buy the cars. Then you sign into this, you get like a membership to the car co-op, and you sign in and out cars as you need them as part of the benefits of your membership. Product as a service. So this is where a company retains ownership of the product while leasing or renting the product for service. So the key element here is the potential for use of this model in virtually all sectors for all products in use. So if you have a product and you're usually trying to sell that product, I have yet to come across an example where you could not, where you would be prohibited, or you couldn't change the model to just sell access to the performance of that product, which in reality is what people want and need. When people say, I need to own this, we've conditioned ourselves to think that. In most cases, in all cases, what they're needing is the function of that product. So one international, very cool example. So it's called Rent the Runway. This is a company that you subscribe to, it's a membership model, and say if I pay my membership dues, I get access to, I believe, about 10 articles of clothing per month. They're totally cleaned and dry cleaned and sanitized and whatever. They get mailed to me. I have full access to them for 1, 2, 3 months, whatever. Then I send them back and I get a second set of clothing. So instead of purchasing the clothing, we're renting the clothing. And there's so many things that I love about this. Wearing, like the way people dress is just so absolutely personal, and staying on trend is so absolutely personal, whether you choose to do it or not, and whatever your trend is that you're following, that to get people to pivot to say, it's okay not to own. It's okay to be wearing something that somebody else wore. It's okay to participate in this economy. Some of the business models that I mentioned earlier, like Standard Aero, remanufacturing, 100-year-old company, did not get into it to be part of the circular economy. Rent the Runway is very specifically invested in this model because they feel it is one of the most sustainable ways to function within the fashion industry. And if you're keeping tabs at home, the fashion industry, next to the oil and gas sector globally, has the biggest carbon footprint. Like, it's horrendous. It's just awful. So this is not a small company. In January, this company received a $1 billion valuation. Like, this is huge. Like, we're talking estimates of triple-digit increases in the sale and marketing of used clothing. It's amazing. Home Depot, I say it's a local example only because Home Depots are everywhere, so it's kind of easy to understand. The tool rental department. Again, the tool rental department has existed since Home Depot existed. I am pretty sure that if I went to talk to these folks and said, hey, why did you get a tool rental department in place? They're not going to say, because we wanted to participate in the circular economy. They thought it was a damn good business idea. And it just turns out that one of these really good business ideas has all these great value, environmental value benefits as well. So on that note, we're going to have one more Slido, or sorry, one of our next Slidos. I will show it to you there. Considering your organization and what you produce or provide to customers, so it could be product or service, through what business model or models do you think your company could become more circular? I don't see any responses yet. Oh, there we go. There's that first one. Oh, very cool. Product life extension. So when you registered for this session, you would have seen that you had an option to choose from one of 4 dates. So we already did one of these. And even just from anecdotally, I can tell you that the responses on this call for which business case, or sorry, which business models people think they could participate in is slightly different than the last one. So it'll be interesting to put all these answers together at the end for us. Not sure. So far we're at about a third that aren't quite sure how they fit in. That is very telling for people like me. It means we need to do collectively, people who study this need to do a much better job of communicating the options. Okay, we're going to carry on here. You know what? No, I'll just wait a couple more minutes. I think we maxed out at 14 or 15 last time, right? Okay. All right, we're going to move on. So we talked about what circular economy is, very, very brief, like it's a whole thing. So if you want the theory behind it, if you want to know the principles and how they apply, do a little more digging there. Then we talked about the 5 business models that make up the circular economy and examples of how those can fit in. Next, it's important to talk about, okay, so what enables this success? Like, you can't just snap your fingers overnight and you've got a new business model. You have to have certain things in place to make sure that when you do start to adjust your business model, that you are successful. So the first one is consumer engagement. It's just like, it's any other type of customer or consumer engagement. It's the same process. We're just making sure that we're asking the right questions. We need to learn more about what consumers actually want and need. Like, to use Rent the Runway as an example, like there are lots of people, women and men, who would say, I will never wear rented clothes. I will never go to a secondhand store if they are lucky enough to be able to afford not to go to a secondhand store. But we are now dealing with a whole generation of consumers who their entire life has been focused on environmental protection, not even as like as a vocation, just as a value system. Learn about those customers, learn about the next generation of customers so that you can meet them at their moment when they're pulling their wallet out. You need to share more. So just like in our last slide, we saw that about a third of the people on this call don't quite know what business model they might fit into. You need to support your customers and your suppliers so that they can understand. They can help you figure out where you can participate. And it does mean a level of transparency that a lot of companies and a lot of sectors are going to have to open up to. We also need to make sure we are walking the talk. This is one area where there is no way that you can say you are participating in a circular economy without actually doing it. This isn't like setting a net zero carbon target and then devoting all your resources to offsetting that with tree planting. Like you can't do that. If we're going to participate in this, we actively have to involve everybody, and we have to probably, unless you started out circular, make a few changes. And the other thing is with consumer engagement, and this is not my opinion, this is what the studies that are available are telling us, is price and quality are still number one. But that does not mean that the circularity piece has to be too far behind, because we have enough processing power and brain power and technology availability and technology diffusion that we are still getting exactly the same results we need on quality. The more people who adopt, the price point will come down. Circular design, major enabler. So this is where we're thinking cradle to cradle during the design phase. Most supply chains and logistics folks, this is not a huge point of functional interaction in a company. It should be, and I realize that even that alone internally, that's a cultural change that we have to accommodate. But when we're talking about circular design, we look at it from the perspective of composition of the product, production process, the product lifespan, and the potential for product recovery. Like, are we designing for recovery? Without that circular design element, even if it's in the way that you are delivering your product and engaging in logistics to bring it back, like sometimes we don't have control of the design element, but we have control over the other parts of the value chain or the life cycle. Disruptive technology. So technologies in general, but you do need access to some disruptive technologies, because for the most part, for the traditional companies, consumer goods or manufacturing companies that make up most businesses right now, it's going to take something disruptive to support that level of change. If we don't insert something disruptive, and the disruptive is it's not a negative thing, it will be that much more difficult to make those changes. So any technology that allows for smarter use of resources, tracking of, God knows, a whole whack of things, anything that allows for data collection or sharing of information, either with suppliers, among production staff, with customers, anything that allows for asset management. Now, in my world, usually when we're talking about asset management, we're talking about like buildings, but your post-consumer product, so something that's already been sold and potentially disposed of, that it's still your asset. If we can find technologies that support management of that asset to get it right back into the shop, you're golden. And I just say at the bottom, et cetera, because a lot of the stuff that are going to help us transition to this circular economic model, either they're still on the drawing board or we're just testing them out. So external engagement, and after I go through this one, we'll take a short break. So we talked about consumer engagement, making sure we truly understand what our consumers want, not just now, but the next batch of consumers, how they will engage. We need to make sure that we are talking to our neighbors, we're talking to our competitors, and I say collaborative competitors. This one is very interesting to me because we have not created a business environment for the most part where competitors actively and openly collaborate. And if we're going to get to system level change, we have to be more open to that. We have to realize that we're greater than the sum of our parts. And there's still enough opportunity to protect our intellectual property, to protect our customer base. We can still do those things, but we do need to actively, not just passively, when somebody else facilitates it, we need to actively collaborate with our competitors. The G word, we need to collaborate and talk to our government. We need to understand we need to really embrace what government's responsibility is in the realm of circular economy. And it's quite significant because anytime we're talking about system level change, a government has to pretty much be involved. And we also need to make sure that we can very clearly and articulate like a respectful position on where we stand. We as business stand with circular economy. We need this to keep employing people. We need this to be profitable, but we do know that we can do this to limit our environmental impact or to reduce our resource consumption. Suppliers, like a fantastic source of, hey, what else can we do? What else you got? Do you have a pilot project we could start in? Like, is there an alternative to this input that I wasn't aware of? I use those examples because those are relationships that supply chain function in a company has established that don't exist anywhere else in the company. Like most times, the design folks, the process engineering folks, the executive, most times they're not establishing those relationships with suppliers that can lead to these goodies and customers. So you have to think about them on both ends, right? So external engagement is customers, but it's also its own thing. With that, before we carry on, we will take a 10-minute break. So I am going to have you back here. I'm in Central Time at about 3 minutes to 11, just to make it frustrating and annoying. 3 minutes to 11 o'clock is when we will have you back here. Grab a cup of coffee. Please come back. I can't see your smiling faces, but I'm sure you're all delightful. And I'd love it if you came back for the second half. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope I have all of you back. We talked about, before we went on break, we talked about the necessary enablers for success in a circular economy. We talked about consumer engagement, circular design, disruptive technologies, and external engagement. There is one more, but it's particularly relevant to supply chain functions, so I thought I'd leave it till after the break. And of course, now my mouse is not working properly, but here we go. The last one I want to talk to you about is reverse logistics. And one of the best quotes that I've come across is reverse logistics is at the heart of the complexity within a circular value chain. It's the process that enables the circular loop to be closed. Like, there is no overstating how key reverse logistics is. Sorry, again with the mouse. So in case you're unaware of what it is, it's the process of moving stuff from its final resting place back into production or other process to capture all remaining value. So if logistics is getting your product out the door or setting up your service for delivery to the customer, reverse logistics is bringing it all back in-house. We can't do circular economic, like anything really, if it involves a physical product, unless we have strong reverse logistics. Just to give you an example of how key this is and how the absence of it can impact things, I'll share with you a statistic. So this is according to, I believe, the same source that is that yellow box, Lacey Long and Spindler. So there is 30 to 40 times more copper in a ton of electronic waste than there is in a ton of copper ore. 30 to 40 more times. I know as a business owner, if I went and started spending all my time on something that was 30 to 40 times less profitable than what I was doing, somebody had better just smack me in the back of the head. So why do we think that huge source of copper is not being gobbled up to a greater extent than we're seeing right now? The answer is we do not have solid reverse logistics. Copper ore, we can go to one spot, one or three or 5 spots, dig into the ground, get our ton of copper ore and get our copper out of it. Where is all this electronic waste? What is the logistics for consolidating all that stuff into 1 or 2 or 5 spots, getting it back to the various shops that want to get an order for it? Without that, we have 30 to 40 times more value in copper floating around in people's garages or landfills than we do of what's going to be in the ground. And yet we're still spending money on trying to get it out of the ground. I hope that example highlights things. Again, I can't see your faces or body language, but I'm hoping that resonates just a little bit with you. So just to give you an example graphically, I think in pictures, I'm not sure if it's a sign of infancy or infantilism, I don't know, but this is reverse logistics. Start with our raw material, we make something or we assemble something, then we have to distribute it to the user. That's logistics. When we're bringing it back from the user to either reuse it and then funnel it back into distribution, we remanufacture, repair it, then funnel it back into assembly, or we recycle it into a different, from a different product where they're increasing the value or downcycling it, then we funnel it back into fabrication or as a raw material. That is reverse logistics. And the supply chain function has a tremendous role, the most critical role to play in this. It includes, there's a laundry list of things that we need to be aware of if we're going to talk reverse logistics. So it is coordination of the collection of end-of-life product. So that's underlined because end of life is subjective. So it's whenever the consumer decides, I'm done. So whether it's because it's gone out of trend, the one tiny little function doesn't work, but the rest of it still works, it broke, whatever, end of life product. We have to go and get it. We have to figure out how to return it or redirect it back to our own shop or to somebody else's. We need to engage in tracing of our product so that we know where it is. We need to be, our reverse logistics need to be as on top of tracing as the FedEx and Purelators and DHLs of the world. We need quality control. So you have to know what that electronic waste, what it's composed of. What's the quality of the metals in it? Has it been already stripped by somebody else? How do we validate that before we bring it in shop and spend money on it? We need to have sorting technology or labor. There needs to be something or somebody that's going to pick through all this stuff. Data collection, absolutely huge. And I believe it comes up later in this presentation, but in case I forgot and it doesn't, I'll mention it here. We as a business community, as governments go, are, in my opinion, essentially bankrupt when it comes to useful data to support transition to circular economy. We have a bazillion metadata points. That is not enough for the average small to medium-sized company to figure out how they should do things in their own shop. We have not enabled and supported small and medium-sized companies to understand their own material needs and flows. Without that, we are not going to get very far. So we also need to coordinate the repair, remanufacturing, and refurbishment of our products, and then we need to send it back out to consumers again. So for all my service-based attendees on this call today, and we had some on the last call as well, this could all be done by one company, but more likely several different companies will be involved in this. So if you are a service-based company and you're thinking, okay, well, how does all this circular economy stuff apply? Because if we're talking about material value, we're talking about putting your hands around something that's three-dimensional. I don't do anything about that. You might not, but you might also, instead of, have a fantastic service that you can offer to support coordination of reverse logistics or other circular economic support by these companies. So if we want to talk about the big picture for reverse logistics, we can Sorry, just got a chat here. I apologize for disrupting the chat. Although this is a good time to say, please, I totally encourage you to use the chat function if you'd like to ask a question that we could discuss in air quotes as a group, or if you would like answered now. If it's more of a comment and you're happy with everybody else seeing it, or we can take a look at it later, that's fine too. But please don't hesitate. There's three big pieces to reverse logistics. Front end, so we call that the reverse logistics piece. The engine, so that's your recovery, whatever it is that you're trying to recover. And then the back end, which is your remarketing. So the three elements you see per segment, those are what you need. Like that's how you would assess your readiness to employ reverse logistics. When you did an assessment on, it will start with the blue, a reverse logistics strategy. Where are we going? Reverse logistics network structure. So who is it that's going to support me with this? Where do I need to go? And also the responsiveness and visibility of your materials flow. You assess your shop relative to those criteria, and you will know where you need to focus your time to get better at reverse logistics. When we get into the actual recovery, you also need a recovery strategy. You need to understand how inventory of your return products is being controlled. You need to evaluate those materials so that you know what you can do with them. Same thing. You assess your current state relative to those 3 points, and you'll know where the gaps are, where you need to focus on. And on the back end, on remarketing, you need to remarket in secondary markets. You need to have a plan for access to those secondary markets. And again, the data, you need remarketing data so that you can determine things like price point. You can determine if it's meeting performance obligations. All of these, this is the gap, this is the needs assessment. This is what you would do if you were going to take a look at reverse logistics in your own shop. They're adapted from a publication that you can see there on the bottom. That is an open source publication. You're welcome to go there. It's, even though it's 5 years old, still very relevant, very useful. You can take a look at that. Okay, we're going to get back to Slido and ask another question. And Maren is on it. Oh, and I don't have Slido on my, Okay, guys, I have a big favor to ask. If one of you could enter into the chat and let Maren know if you do or do not have access to the Slido. Okay, so I don't get it, but that's okay. I don't need it right now. It's unfortunate because I would love for you guys to be able to see this, but no. Okay, too bad. So does your company currently operate any type of reverse logistics? So even though we can't as a group, I don't think, see the results of that, please respond anyway, because we will be consolidating these just to see where we stand. Shoot. Okay, so we're going to move to our next set of questions. Which of the enablers are the biggest gap for your company? And which of the enablers is your company already active with? So if you'll remember, we spent a few minutes talking about all 5 enablers. Okay, we're gonna move on. Oh, sorry, apparently the answers are still coming in. Okay, I'm sorry that we're not able to share the results of that, but I really appreciate the effort of entering those responses. I can't speak for Supply Chain Canada at this moment, but I believe we could probably get you guys access to those results, the consolidated copy. Okay, we're going to move on to supply chain advantage. So we've talked about general circular economy. We talked about the business models, the 5 business models. We've talked about the enablers that can create success within those business models. Now we're going to narrow it even further. We're going to talk specifically about supply chain. Even if you are not in a supply chain function, it is critically important that you understand this, because it is up to the rest of us to support our supply chain people, because there's so much low-hanging fruit and is such a necessary starting point for employing circular economic models. So the major advantages: it is the home of reverse logistics. The folks that are engaged in the supply chain and logistics functions already have tools in place for material tracing and inventories. Like, obviously, they would have to be adapted if we're starting to talk about bringing products back or introducing substitutions and alternatives or a different type of asset management. But the tools and the mentality is already there. There are existing supplier relationships. Some of them are decades old and extend past specific individuals. Those are the relationships where we can say, hey, this is what we're looking at doing. Is anything in your world, could anything be an alternative? You know, do you have any other, do you have any recycled inputs that you could provide while still assuring the performance and quality of our output? There is a very strong and consistent body of knowledge within the supply chain and logistics profession. And it's, in my opinion, it's quite unique. We don't really find that anywhere else. And so to continue to capitalize on it and foster it is very important. And there's also an excellent peer network, as exemplified by the fact that we have Supply Chain Canada. Some of the specific tools and practices that folks in the supply chain and logistics function can support and can get engaged with without, like, you don't need a full scale change to get started on this stuff. These can be the first and baby steps. So getting started on reverse logistics, we spent quite a few slides on that, but can't stress enough, anything that you can do to support getting access to your product, bringing it back in-house, or the output of another company or another process that you think you could benefit from an input perspective, put your efforts there, go get it. Carrying out material audits and flow analysis. I said that in some areas we are bankrupt on the type of data that we need to make these changes. The first thing we need to do is support these production companies, the small and medium production companies, in understanding their own material flow so that we can share it. Procurement specifications. Procurement specifications are used all the time, have been forever. Making small adjustments to those specifications so that we can start to not just require circular economic elements, but we can kind of put our suppliers on notice that this is the direction that we're going in. We know that that approach works. It worked when we started introducing occupational health and safety. Procurement specifications were one of the first tools used to require suppliers to ensure, you know, safe working conditions for their employees, to ensure that chemicals were low VOC. We also know that it works because it was one of the first vehicles being used to promote environmental management systems. So as an example, I'm going to say probably about 20 years ago, Ford said to all its suppliers, primary, secondary, and tertiary, you are not going to deal with Ford Canada, or sorry, you're not going to deal with Ford unless you have an environmental management system that conforms to ISO 14001. Nobody wanted to do this. Like, no, nobody wanted one of these things. Doesn't matter. You want to play in the Ford playground, you need to have one of these things. And it worked. Those procurement specifications turned into the vehicle to dictate to this supply chain what had to happen. So we know that this works. Take back programs. So in the same vein as reverse logistics, you can see what the potential is to bring your own products back in-house, but you can also partner that or tie that into your procurement specifications and say, okay, supplier, you're taking back your waste product. Like, you can do that. There's nothing legally saying that you can. And if you're partnering with, this is where I got to collaborative competition. If you start partnering with other companies that use the same types of suppliers, you have even more bench strength to make that happen. Supplier partnerships and pilot studies. So this is super cool because for as much as the partnerships, they're deep, they're good, and you can have open conversations. It's the introduction of these pilot studies that I find very interesting. So using something like ASICS, the athletic apparel company, they are partnering with a Canadian company out of BC, and whether they are still in partnership, I don't know. So this information could be 1 or 2 years old. But they had a partnership with this company out of BC, and they were trying to develop spider silk, so synthetic spider silk, to use as an input into their athletic apparel program. That was an amazing pilot study. ASICS paid for a good chunk of it. The technology company paid for the rest of it. And they let people see the results of this. Like, they shared this information. It did not compromise their IP. Like, they still had, primary access to this product, but it was so beneficial for everybody else to hear about it. Alternative sources and substitution, it can be very related to the use of pilot studies. And sometimes it's just the use of alternative sources and substitutions that are already very well established in the marketplace, but not necessarily familiar to your own shop. Sector buying groups. I sort of touched on this with respect to the Take Back program. Anything that you can do to increase your bench strength so that you can start to, as a group, either engage or demand from suppliers or engage and dictate to consumers. I think there's massive benefit to be had there. And then also waste marketability. Figuring out your own waste streams. And I'm like, for the most part, I'm talking about the industrial waste streams and figuring out who needs that. Like, do you have a huge amount of aluminum cutoffs and you've got a company over here that needs small bits of aluminum? Like, why are we not coming together? And it's the same thing for your own inputs. Can you find an organization where they're like, we got all this silicone. We got all the silicone. We don't know what to do with. You're like, hey, dude, we need some silicone. Like, what a perfect relationship. Marin's laughing at me for my use of the word dude when I'm in my 40s. What does he know? He's much younger than me. You guys can't see that though. Okay, so the arrows. This is like the low-hanging fruit. This is where we want to focus our time and our effort right now. In your own shop and as collaborative competitor groups, as sector groups, material audit and flow analysis. So important. Let's get rid of that data vacuum. Procurement specifications, so easy. Like, it's very rarely does adjustment of a procurement specification cost the company making the specification. Like, even if it doesn't fundamentally in this moment in time change the product, it is an excellent vehicle for putting suppliers on notice. Preference will be given to those companies that have employed circular economic examples or circular economic strategies in their companies. Please provide examples. Like, it could just be as simple as allowing it a piece of your ranking criteria. And then the supplier partnerships and pilot studies is the other one. So assuming that everyone in the audience here is the same as everyone else in the world and does not have unlimited time and money, and you need to know where to start, these would be the 3 areas where we get the biggest bang for our buck right off the hop. So I will spend, just because those are the 3, I'll spend just a little bit more time on them. So the material audit and flow analysis, as I said, this means understanding what comes into your shop, how it is used, and what goes out. Ideally, we would extend that to, after it goes out, this is how the consumer uses it, and this is what they do after that. Sometimes that's the magic box. We don't know that. Collect the data that you can. Is there seasonality? Is there stuff where we end up covering for each other because there's a shortage, but we don't really pay attention to the shortage? Understanding that material flow, you can't do much else in your own shop without it. You want to use this information to find alternatives and markets and waste. So this is the waste piece for those of you that have lean training. This is where that would come in. Procurement specifications as examples of things you can include in that. Recycled content, product take back, performance specifications. So performance specifications means I acknowledge you may provide me with a remanufactured part. I don't care as long as it meets my performance specifications. So even that tiny little switch, like if they can do this in aerospace, if they can put planes in the sky that have remanufactured engines, I can't imagine, they do it in, maybe, I don't know about healthcare, but I can't imagine another sector where we can't do it. Like the tolerances in aerospace, pretty tight, and they're doing this. You can also specify that you want some circularity considerations or standards abided by from your suppliers. And again, the more bench strength that you have, the easier it is to request that in your specifications documents. One thing you might want to keep in mind is somebody on the other end, so we're all suppliers to somebody else, this message goes up the chain. So your customers are going to start to accumulate that bench strength, whether it's, at a volume level for one company or just multiple companies coming together. They're going to start demanding this from their suppliers, of which you will be one. So either way, we're all going to have to be ready to start making moves if we are not already. And partnerships and pilot studies. So some of the questions you can ask is there a technology around me that needs a testing ground? So here in Manitoba, we have a technology incubator, like it's called North Porridge. It's a nonprofit, bunch of companies there. They're trying to start and get their wares to market. They need places that they can get real world example on their technologies. Could there be a partnership there? Can you test shipping routes? Maybe you can work with another company, either in the same sector or a different company, to minimize the shipping time. Do you have customers that might be willing to test a product of a different composition? Or do you have suppliers willing to trial the take back initiatives? None of these are earth-shattering things. All of them require a conversation and can be done a very little bit at a time to start to prove out the concept and get the data that's needed to make that critical cost benefit analysis to present to a board or an executive. Granted, there needs to be an internal culture enabling these types of things, but that's going to be the same no matter what kind of organizational change that we want to make. So another question. Again, I apologize sincerely. For some reason, I have lost the ability to show you the responses, but you can still reply. Please do so. Which of the following circular practices does your organization need training in? And I believe you should also have access to the other subsequent 3 questions. Oh, no, Mary's shaking his head at me. So we'll finish with this one, and there's 3 more after this that I will prompt you to answer in a moment. Okay, we're going to move on. 3 more questions. These are the last 3. What type of material data do you currently collect? Please select all that apply. Are you interested in collaborating with other organizations and professions? And would you be interested in a pilot? Those are the 3 questions that I'd like you to take some time to answer. Marion, you're gonna let me know when responses start to trickle off there? Thanks.
Some of the first questions we discussed, we're still coming in with the first question, so.
Okay.
The second question.
Okay.
So everyone, the second question is live. Are you interested in collaborating with other organizations and professions in developing circular economy strategies?
Just so you can see the responses.
Okay, so I know you guys can't see the responses, but I can sort of dictate them to you here a little bit. Looks like we maybe have just under half of our usual responses in. And with that, just under half of you may be interested in collaborating. So I think we'll move to the third question now. Would your company be interested in participating in a circularity pilot project? And yes, I realize that many of you on this call won't be able to speak totally on behalf of the company, but use your best guess. So we've already got at least a couple of you are already engaged in pilot projects, which is super cool. That is awesome. Man, I wish we could have a big conversation about what those pilot projects are. If you care to share, please enter it into the chat. Let everybody know about your pilot projects. That's amazing. Okay, I think I will, we seem to be slowing down on responses now, so I'm going to carry on. We're virtually at the end of our time together. I talked about the three things that, you know, if we, knowing we have limited resources and time, the three things that I think would be most valuable: material audit, flow analysis, procurement specification, and supplier partnerships and pilot studies. I stand by that. However, when we walk out the door, or I guess when you shut me off and you have to go and talk to somebody about what you talked about and learned about today, there are 4 things you can do before you start undertaking some of these studies. We need to keep validating the supply chain function as strategic and not just transactional. The people on this call who are in the supply chain function, they know this. But the folks that are not in this function, I encourage you to support that mentality. Support the idea that the supply chain function needs to be integrated and not just procurement, not just logistics. Many companies have already started this or are well down the path of this level of integration, but there's lots of companies that aren't. If I've said it once or twice, so I'm going to say it a third time. Collect material flow data for your shop. Whatever it takes, it doesn't need to be like hugely significant. If you're starting with no information, even just the very little bit that you can collect will be useful. Use the tools that you already have in place. There's nothing to say that you need to subscribe to new data tracking services or anything like that. To every extent that you can, Use the tools and the people that you have to do this. Advocate for the education of yourself and your employees and suppliers. As I said at the beginning, for circular economic theory to become more than theory, for it to become an actual change in the way that we live, work, and play, we have to have everybody on the same page. We have to be working to the same set of material and energy knowledge, the same values, and we have to be open to the same level of sharing and communication. That's only going to come if we educate each other on what our options are in a non-competitive, in a collaborative fashion. And find an executive sponsor. If you are in the executive club and you're on this call, find yourself the supply chain logistics guru and let them be the champion and support them through that. Support that function in making all this other magic happen. The one thing that I want you to leave with is that there's no way that circularity in any form will move forward without strategic contribution from and integration of supply chain expertise. Without this expertise, risk will be heightened and opportunity will be lost. This has already been demonstrated. I think we got sort of an advanced view with how the pandemic was shaking out with respect to material flows and is still. Anybody that happens to be waiting for an appliance knows that this is how it will go. So your involvement and engagement is critical. And with that, I will provide you just with the list of resources here that you may want to access and some of the references from the presentation. We will stay on the call for another 15 minutes. Anybody that would like to engage in the chat function, we can answer questions or you can query the other attendees. Please feel free to do so. We'd love to hear from you. But thank you very much for your attention and spending some time with me. Really appreciate it. Hi, everybody. For those of you that are still on, we just received an inquiry in the chat. I will read it to you and then I will do my best to answer it. I am currently in the food industry. I would like to start the circular economy concept in the company. Where do you think is a good start? Currently, we don't even collect data and are not transparent in some of the data. So I feel collecting the material data should be the first step. Excellent question. The food sector by itself actually is one that has probably more data than other sectors, but that because of the overall food wastage that's been studied a lot and a lot by cities, because of course it becomes a composting and landfill issue. In terms of a starting point, if we're looking for low cost, easy to employ, or easy to accept steps, yes, material, absolutely. I would assume that your material flow would probably be very well known, only because you know what ingredients are coming in. If it's about being more transparent about what is going out, and the company isn't totally comfortable with that yet, there are a lot of options for taking waste food, if it's still edible, to charities, to underprivileged areas, to those facing food insecurity. And then the secondary option to that, we've talked mostly about materials, but is on the energy side. There's a lot of options for ensuring that scrap foods can get into a compost pile instead of into general municipal waste. So while we might not yet be minimizing the inputs, we might not still be scaling properly for what consumers are eating, there is still an opportunity to reclaim waste energy in that compost. And there still is an opportunity for that material life, so to speak, to be extended by going to those in need if it's not used by the primary consumer. I hope that is helpful to you. You can reach out to me directly if you would like to discuss further. Thanks for the question. There's another question about wondering if the slide deck for the presentation is shared. Sorry, my only hesitation is I have to work with Supply Chain Canada on that answer. I believe it will be. I don't want to guarantee it, but I believe it will be. If it's not shared directly, it will be shared in a summary form once we finished all four presentations. As I said, this is the second of 4, and they'll all be the same. It's just a selection of dates. So that, hopefully that answers it. Okay, for those of you that are remaining on this webinar, we're going to call it for the day. We're going to say we're done. Thank you very much for your attendance, and I wish all of you a lovely day. Thanks. Bye.